Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, March 15th, 2021. Finally, I guess actually the real Ides of March have actually arrived. I almost lost sight of that. I don't know what happened. Why did we talk about? I don't know. It was probably we were trying to decide what the Ides of February was, just because March was coming and we had an eye on it already. But no, ready to roll on the actual Ides of March. Nothing happens. It's not on my NAFTA calendar or anything like that, but plenty of other business for the day, as you may have seen in the Morning Post announcing that the show is now live. And if you want to catch up on what's happening NAFTA calendar-wise, well, let's see. Eastern Orthodox Lent begins today. Okay, there you go. So for all of you who are waiting for that, patiently wondering when that would begin. Also important, according to my calendar, in Mexico, Benito Juarez's birthday, not his actual birthday, which is apparently sometime next week, but his observation of his birthday. They like to do things on Mondays, I guess, down in Mexico, just the way we do here. So if you're listening in Mexico and you're still in at work, I'm sorry. I don't know whether it's the sort of thing you would have the day off for, but it certainly seems that way. All right, might be a nice holiday to take off. I'll have to check into that. Less familiar with bank holidays in Mexico than perhaps I ought to be. And no Greco-Roman notations on my NAFTA calendar as far as I can tell. But, we're keeping up with things nonetheless. Lots to keep an eye on today. And many stories we'll round up from over the weekend. Greg Dworkin already working on putting his raft of stories together. Bill in Portland has got our morning tweet. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. That's good news, because if it wasn't, you wouldn't have heard any of this. So far, let's see. Kagro X, me, David Waldman, explains why the Ides of March. Oh, that's good. Why are we talking about it? Why is the Ides of March? Why is it Dr. Ben Carson's favorite day? Hint, his nickname is Dr. Stabby. All right, listen here. Well, we'll have to figure that one out. Wasn't it that he, I don't think it was on the Ides of March. Wouldn't it be ironic if it was? He got it, didn't he? Wasn't one of his famous, I don't know what the hell kind of story it was supposed to be. Growing up stories. It was something about him getting in an altercation with somebody in line at a fast food restaurant somewhere, and maybe getting in did he stab somebody? Is that what happened? We know he's got the scalpel in hand as a surgeon all the time, but I doubt he's stabbing people on the table. What was that story? Well, we'll look it up and see if we can figure that whole thing out one of these days. He's, of course, a little less relevant than he used to be when he was sleeping in his office over at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Yeah, there we are. I just checked it up. So Ben Carson told the story at one point that when I was a teenager, I nearly stabbed somebody. I don't know whether that means he tried and missed, in which case, I don't know at what point during his lifetime he developed this idea that he had surgeon's hands. But I guess after that, maybe he practiced a little bit about getting to cut people correctly when he lunged at them with knives. But there you have it. True. Oh, and apparently the person was a close relative as well. So that's pretty interesting. Lots of people back in the days of Julius Caesar up at the top of Roman society were very often closely related to one another. So maybe another connection. I don't know. We'll try and I don't know why we're trying to make Ben Carson relevant for today, but we might as well give it a shot. It's something that could certainly fill 2 hours and you wouldn't be able to finish, so you could serialize the program and move on that way. All right. Well, let's see. What other fun things are happening? Speaking of bank holidays in Mexico, not particularly close by, but closer than we are, bank holiday of sorts ought to be declared in Texas. I happen to see a random story being reported by the Hill of a woman arrested at a Texas bank after bucking that business's mask mandate. And I guess foolish enough to ask the age-old question in situations like this, well, what are you going to do about it? You arrest me? Well, I guess in Texas, they arrest you left and right for just about anything, and except for, of course, carrying semi-automatic weapons into the state house. That one they won't arrest you for. But looks like according to the photo here, this might have been on March 11th. And, I mean, they didn't arrest her for not wearing the mask, technically. They, I guess, arrested her for refusing to leave the business after being asked to either wear a mask or leave. I'm just note that it's ironic that Texas, which we sometimes think of alongside our mental images of the fabled Old West, just odd that they would be the first place to start arresting you for not wearing a mask when you entered the bank. But, you know, they're innovative and ahead of the times, I guess, in that respect down there in Texas. Okay, so just wanted to let you know in case you were thinking of making a bank withdrawal. If you're thinking about doing it in Mexico, bank's probably closed. I should look up whether that's really closed or not. And if you're thinking of crossing the border in Texas to do it, remember to wear your mask, or at least don't refuse their orders to leave. All right, well, that was the most important news I could find for the whole weekend. I think opinions differ, and we'll ask Greg Dworkin what he found over the weekend and see if there's anything different. It was probably all banking news for you as well, right?
Well, absolutely. You know,
sure.
I think Willie Sutton still rules. You know, why do you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is.
Right.
So I tried to make a withdrawal. The bank was closed, not my fault. So I just went ahead and, you know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Did it my own way. American ingenuity in Mexico or whatever.
Yeah, something like that. It happens everywhere. You know, I'm
right.
Read this story.
Speaking of being a thug, there's Andrew Cuomo.
Oh, yeah. Well.
Or as Dick Nixon, the fella posing as Dick Nixon on Twitter says, yes. Cuomo's having the fellow who distributes his vaccines call county executives to judge loyalty.
I thought we were done with this. Not Cuomo.
Well, he hasn't resigned, so we're not done with this.
I mean, the idea of calling places, people, and asking them if they're loyal or they're not going to get government help if they're not.
You know, these thugs aren't original. They pick up ideas from other people. There's probably, you know, a thug chat room encrypted that people pass around ideas to do. Hey, here's a thuggish thing we could do in politics that nobody ever thought of before. Hey, that's great. Thanks for passing it around.
Weird.
I appreciate your experience here.
People are going to think New York is responsible for all this.
Right. The big story over the weekend, in terms of like a story that people wrote, was Rebecca Traister in New York writing, Andrew Cuomo's governorship has been defined by cruelty that disguised chronic mismanagement. Why was that celebrated for so long? And it's a very detailed piece that I'm not going to go into because it's actually painful to read.
Yeah.
But it's like all the bad things that happened to staffers who worked for him. And basically, you know, part of it is, Perry Bacon summed it up. I have this in the Pundit Roundup in a tweet. He said, this story is so well written and reported, a real must read, one of the best pieces I've read in a while, but it's not fun to read because of all the terrible mean behavior it details from Cuomo and his team. And A.D. Quigg writes, this was a tough read throughout, including the part about how Cuomo's behavior was an open secret among the press corps. And go ahead and details all the Albany people who, you know, local TV, local news, local papers, whose job it was to report on Capitol News. Basically, the women quit. They just couldn't deal with him year after year and just got out of the news business. I mean, that's how bad it was.
That is.
So when they say an open secret by the press corps, yes. So I've gotten a lot of criticism on Twitter for saying, you know, you got to defend Cuomo because, like, we can't afford to have a Republican governor. No, this guy is a thug. He's always been a thug. Well, people on the left don't like him. Well, you know, personally, I happen to believe that I'm exactly in the center of the country when it comes to politics. People are either to my left or to my right. So as a centrist and a moderate, I therefore say that I've never liked him.
Yeah, all right.
He's a crook. You know, when they started to investigate corruption, he set up a commission to do it. It got too close to him, so he closed the commission down. People forget about that. That's one of the first things he did when he was governor. And he wanted to keep the slush fund between him and Christie, known as the Port Authority, going, so we refused to let anybody look at that. So, the guy's always been a thug. And, his thuggish behavior now is just indefensible. So, you have to let the investigation happen. Fine. Tish James is doing the investigation, which is appropriate with a thug because she's like an attorney general.
Yeah.
So that'll happen. Right. But this is a political issue. Yes. Just like impeachment is a political issue. Well, the law strictly says you can't do treason because we're not this is a political thing when you impeach somebody. And impeachment, in fact, is now making the rounds in the New York legislature because Cuomo won't resign. And it's a political issue that he has. And both senators and most of the New York delegation have called on him to resign. He's lost the support of his own party. That doesn't mean that he can't hang on. He saw how the governor of Virginia handled things and just sort of thought he could tough it through. Maybe he can, maybe he can't. That remains to be seen. But there's no defending his behavior.
No reason to waste any time on attempting that I can see. I mean, he's never been super popular among the more progressive circles. He was widely hated for different reasons. It is disappointing, though, that I don't know. I don't lay this at the feet of the press corps or media. I always get annoyed with this open secret business. How come I don't know more about this? But, if it was open, I could have been reading about it for one thing. But it's disturbing, I guess. I don't blame the press for it, but why are they so impotent?
As the story of Cuomo's tactics gets reported in a more critical light, Josefa Velasquez, a 29-year-old senior reporter for The City, that's capital letters.
Senior reporter, 29.
Said that she sometimes considers how some colleagues, including some of those now covering Cuomo's troubles, never used the power they had to defend anybody before this. She's referring to both reporters and some of the governor's advisors. Nobody checked him. He's the governor of New York, who's consolidated all this power and has all these political allies. But his aides and the men in the press corps, some of them are just as complicit in this behavior. And they talk about how there's just a toxic atmosphere in Albany for this sort of thing.
Well, I'll certainly stand aside for letting women reporters in Albany take the lead on criticizing the press on it, and I'll happily jump out of the way for that. But I felt I didn't want to incorrectly lay the blame. Obviously the blame lays with Cuomo and the people who enabled him, but it is interesting. Just now twice in a row, Titanic jackasses from out of New York have managed to somehow get the press to all acknowledge what kind of person they are, and not until way too late do they actually reveal bits and pieces of it. And it's and I guess another weird thing. And I guess it goes to show, for people who insist on balance, Democrats or both parties, everyone does it. I guess some very bad behavior normalized for a Democratic politician too. But I guess the real problem is stop normalizing abnormal and aberrant and illegal behavior. Press corps, I don't know.
Well, that's one way to look at it.
Although
and
the
many,
only way I'm finding out
here's
about
another,
it is the press corps. So,
with the ascent of Joe Biden, all of a sudden accountability is cool again.
Yeah, I guess so. I wonder if, that poses its own problems as well. Of course, eventually, and I'm sure people are already thinking about it. Well, eventually they'll get back to asking questions about Joe Biden and the way he behaves, and I guess they will. All right.
Right. There's a combination of channeling Marcos Molitzis and The Daily Show, Jon Stewart. Don't be a dick.
Yeah.
That's basically the whole thing. Stewart over the weekend basically said, famously he called Tucker Carlson a dick in his Crossfire days.
Ah, yes.
And he apologized to dicks everywhere because, Tucker Carlson is just that bad.
Well, yes.
So, don't be a dick was the original motto of Daily Kos. If you want to post here, post whatever you want, but don't be a jerk about it. So, your behavior is in fact going to catch up with you. If you're really like this, it's bad. And, standards are changing, not fast enough, obviously. But, this is not just stuff you can bury. No. It's interesting and weird, but it's because it interacts with the press directly. But the press apparently thinks this is a much bigger story than Cuomo's handling of healthcare data and nursing home deaths. in manipulating data to make himself look a little better.
Like maybe questionable there. I don't. He
didn't cause the deaths. I mean, that's an overreaction. But he was not transparent about reporting the data. That's pretty established.
Yeah,
you can argue about how detailed and problematic that was. But there's no question he was less than transparent about it, made up his own data, and didn't allow his health department to answer. And he basically took over the political function of his health departments, which was not a good thing. But, this behavior towards other human beings who happen to work in the press corps, who happen to be female, is unacceptable, of course, and directly impacts them. And so the press is all over this.
Yeah, well, they ought to be. It's interesting that he would, and now here he, for whatever reason, what a terrible idea to try and seek and meld these two things together, because he's got an enormous problem on the transparency front with the handling of the pandemic, and to meld the two in the middle of all this by what? Sending his... Who did he send to start calling health departments to measure people's loyalty?
The guy who's in charge of distributing vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, how could you possibly say what we really need to do here is combine this gasoline with this match?
Right. So just in case any of you really thought this was overwrought and that Cuomo's not as bad as they say, look what I'm doing now.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that's just insane.
Right. So, I'm convinced. That's all I can say. And it's a political problem and a political issue. And we'll let the legal ramifications, they grind exceedingly slow, but small, but, take their time, and eventually the truth will come out and all of that. And in the meantime, years before that actually comes to resolution, this political problem is going on, and he's in big trouble.
Okay. Well.
So that was one of the big stories.
Yes.
Now, one of the other big stories is what's happening with the pandemic. Zeynep Tufekci posted this CDC chart, which is absolutely remarkable. As she says, look at this chart.
Oh, well.
That line that's fallen off a cliff starting around January 10th is the 65-plus folks hospitalized for COVID. 62.8% of 65-plus, 26% of all adults in the U.S. have had at least one vaccine dose. Mm-hmm. And basically what she's saying is the older folks are simply not being hospitalized anymore.
All right. Not because we don't care about them and we want them to die in the street either.
Right, and hospitalization lags infection by about 3 weeks. So that's important to know. Now, here's a fascinating piece. Hold your breath, hold your nose, read it anyway, by Dan Diamond, very good health reporter who now works at the Washington Post. We want to be educated, is the quote, not indoctrinated, say Trump voters wary of COVID shots. The responses of focus groups participants suggest they can be persuaded, but perhaps not by politicians involving the former president. And Diamond sums it up in a tweet. He says, don't talk about warp speed. This is a Frank Luntz focus group, which was held with Tom Frieden, the former CDC director. Don't talk about warp speed, but focus on the years of research before the vaccine. Don't imply it's my civic duty, because remember, these are rugged individualists who really don't care about you. Don't put politicians in ads, including Trump. Trump voters tell Frank Luntz and Tom Frieden how to cure their vaccine resistance. And the interesting thing is that, maybe warp speed wasn't exactly an inspired choice for the name of this whole thing.
Okay.
You're moving too fast. You didn't do the research.
I see. Yeah. That's the least of their problems.
You should have called it Operation American Pride.
Operation, I don't know what, deliberate. Yeah. I mean, okay. I get that. So who do they make a suggestion about who to put in the ads? Strangely, Frank Luntz polled number one has put me in the ads.
Well, he's a trusted name in conservative circles. He points out
that would be funny.
These people represent 30 million Americans. Without them, you're not getting herd immunity.
Yeah, so we can get rid of them.
So you need to talk to them and at least saying what was going on here. From the article, participants were adamant they all believed coronavirus threat was real. Okay, that part's been done. Many having contracted it themselves are aware of critically ill friends and family, and they didn't want to be condemned as anti-vaxxers who opposed all vaccines. They blame their hesitation on factors like the unknown long-term effects of new vaccines, even though scientists have stressed their confidence in the product. They accused politicians and government scientists of repeatedly misleading them this past year, echoing Trump's charges that Democrats used the virus as an election year weapon and overhyped its dangers. even though 500,000 people have died.
Yeah.
Several said that recent political appeals to get the shot were only hardening their opposition. Now, you have to appreciate the fact that other data, looking at where the vaccine hesitancy is, are white Republicans and rural areas. Okay. And that's important for a lot of different reasons. Just to take a objective look at it, rural areas have different issues. They have much less population density. If you live on a farm, you're not going to get exposed to that many people. The idea that you have to lock down the way a New York City street does, not that it's ever locked down, it's just wrong because the lifestyle is different, your exposure is different, your risk is different. So rural areas are in fact different, and this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. But if you're talking about rural areas and white Republicans, often the same thing, but not always the same thing, being the hesitant group, then you're going to have to deal with issues that are peculiar to them and not what you might see, let's say, on the coasts in the big cities. So we want to be educated, not indoctrinated, said a man identified as Adam from New York, who praised the vaccines as a miracle, albeit suspicious. And Sue from Iowa says she fears political manipulation of the vaccines, even though she's been a pharmacist for Merck. Ugh. I know their vaccines are good products. I trust them. What I don't trust is the government telling me what I need to do when they haven't led us down the right road.
What? I mean, all right, yeah, because they changed the advice on masks once, which is kind of a different road. But
yeah, exactly. But what I'm saying is you don't have to validate their concerns. You have to acknowledge their concerns.
Yes, or give them
and then deal with it if you want to get them to change their mind. So the focus group's concerns echoed pollsters' findings about Trump voters' significant vaccine hesitancy. CBS New York YouGov poll released Sunday, 33% of Republicans said they wouldn't get a shot. Another 20% said they were undecided. Interestingly, 25% of the current Congress is yet to be vaccinated.
Yes, I read that this morning.
In contrast,
you'll never
guess who. Democrats said they were opposed to getting vaccinated, and another 19% were undecided. And the lawmakers' pitches fell flat, and in some cases, the politically tinged rhetoric seemed to inspire more doubts. McCarthy said he understood the Trump voters' hesitation because pharmaceutical companies waited until after Trump lost the election to announce their promising vaccine results.
No, they didn't.
This is not the guy you want to make this pitch.
All right.
Right? All he did is increase resentment. It's political stunts like that that leave doubt in our minds, said a man identified as David from Texas.
Probably going to get arrested.
But the focus group loved Frieden, an appointee of President Obama, a detail that went unmentioned, particularly after he rattled off 5 facts about the virus and the vaccines. The single fact that swayed me the most was Dr. Frieden's comment, the long-term impacts of COVID could be or are worse than the impacts of the vaccine, says Peter from Missouri. Peter added he went from 80% opposed to probably 75% in favor. His points were it's been 20 years of research to get here. The public service announcement by the presidents was terrible. It was propaganda, and it was annoying. To these folks, they didn't like Fauci.
Is that a good enough excuse?
They've already labeled Fauci as a liar and a flip-flopper. Yeah. So fine, have somebody else other than Fauci do it. Have Scott Gottlieb do it. Have
Fauci do it
Tom Frieden do it.
I guess, right. Well,
I mean, this is the purpose of the focus groups, is to find out this stuff so you can be more efficient and better about what you're trying to do.
Have Abby do it. That's fine by me. I don't object. She can calm down. I haven't said a word about her. All right. Well,
and she's extremely vaccine hesitant, by the way. I can tell you that.
Well, yeah, you know.
You take her to the vet, she's ready. You know, like, what am I doing here, guys? I thought you were taking me to the park.
Yeah. All right. Well, I can't blame her for that.
Right.
Well, let's see. That's infuriating, but I guess we have to deal with them in some fashion. And I don't know. I mean, I guess one way is to say, all right, what stupid crap do you believe? All right. Write that
think
down
of it this way, because this is a sphere that we are much more comfortable with, if not unhappy or happy about.
Oh, okay.
If you want to convince voters,
you
have to go where they are. You don't have to like the fact that they have really dumb things that they think, because people have dumb things that they think. You do, I do, they do.
Yeah.
And so what you're trying to do is persuade them
All right.
And if you're trying to persuade them, you have to hold your nose about what their core beliefs are that offend you because you're still trying to get their vote.
Yes, although not in this case, not vote.
You'll never like it. You will never like it.
Vaccine.
At some point you'll say, I give up on these people. I just have to outvote them. But the whole idea of trying to persuade people continues to have salience in politics because basically that's how you win, whether you like it or not. So these people have to be vaccinated, whether you like it or them or not.
Yeah. All right. Well, so certain they don't like the politicians. How about a Herman Cain ad for the vaccine? Would that convince them? Is he a politician
well, it hasn't convinced the Cain family, so I don't know. Right, perhaps he's not the best person. Again, he's a politician, so you don't want to do that.
Okay.
Now, the cavalry is coming. This is from Stat News. The White House is set to unveil a wide-reaching billion-dollar campaign aimed at convincing every American to get vaccinated.
All right. I think
Television, radio, and digital advertising blitz set to kick off within weeks. Will focus on skeptical Americans. And they'll focus on safety and effectiveness.
All right. Have they read this?
I don't know.
All right. We should mail it to them, I guess. Oh, don't mail it. It might never get there. Still working on that.
But here's what they say. As for the specific content, administration officials said they were mindful that appeals directly from Biden or Fauci are not likely to sway vaccine-hesitant people.
Right.
As a result, they're expected to recruit both celebrities and trusted local officials to advance the pro-vaccine message.
Okay, like not the governor of New York or anything, though, right?
Right, for example.
Okay, sure. We'll get some celebrities. People love celebrities. I don't know. We could have it delivered free with a pizza. That's another thing.
Wait. What's on the pizza?
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. Ha! Fooled you. It's vaccine. Well, we'll have to think of some way that will convince them. For next week, they'll tell us they hate celebrities, too. I'm sure. Okay. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We having a little chat during the break. I got my vaccine. I was convinced by this focus group. I said, I can't believe these people who are hesitant about the vaccine. That was the convincing thing for me. Yeah. And so I went out and took their vaccine from them and had it injected into my left arm. But this might be valuable information. I thought it, would be generally valuable to say. I mean, I'm not like, I don't think there's anybody listening to the show who is thinking, I'm not going to get the vaccine. Oh, wait, now I will. But I will say this. We had our vaccines administered at one centralized county location, like a big, giant vaccination clinic. And I think that probably, it occurred to me that this might be concerning to some people generally. And as it turns out, it is. But anyway, I can report this. This thing was beautifully run and administered. And they occupied the space of a closed anchor store at the local mall, a Nordstrom store that had closed the year previous. And so it was this gigantic expanse of indoor space. And it was, if anything, I would say overstaffed with volunteers. But then I found out that the trick is that if you volunteer for the day at the clinic, you get a vaccine at the end of your workday. So that's a good way to get in and get your vaccine early if you're not scheduled to get it otherwise. So as a result, there was somebody every 5 or 6 feet to direct you, to keep the traffic flowing and people moving into the registration desks, and the registration desks were stretched out across the expanse of the store. We were in and out of that place. We got a 10-minute window for our vaccine appointments, which was a little concerning going in because, you know, vaccines usually given at the doctor's office. 10-minute window wouldn't be enough to handle anything. They were doing 35 slots every 10-minute window. And I did have some doubts about how well that would work. And we were in and out of there, door to door, 30 minutes, including a 15-minute wait after the vaccine to see if you are having any kind of reaction. So I thought that was pretty well administered. And I didn't wait in line anywhere. I wasn't near anybody miraculously and all of that.
Right.
It was really pretty good.
My first clinic where I got the shot was similarly configured. Now, they give you these appointments just so that they could regulate traffic flow. If you happen to get there early, they'll take you early if they have a slot. It's not like you can only get vaccinated in the 10 minutes that they give you. But they give those slots out so that 75 people don't show up for 20 seats, you know, all at once. So they just sort of use that to regulate you a little bit.
So far, it's
now,
working.
Personally, I would rather get the vaccine and then 2 weeks later spend a day at the clinic helping.
Yeah, okay.
You know, but that's just me.
Yeah, well, I think that we're talking about people who otherwise weren't immediately eligible.
Well, if you need the help, that's what you need to do.
Yeah,
I would rather get the vaccine, commit to helping, and then show up 2 weeks later fully vaccinated to give it out to people who you don't know.
My hope is that the people who were doing the injecting had done that. But I think the people who they had all sorts of they had vests on with little labels on about like what sort of volunteer they were. So there were people
so
who were
you didn't confuse a nurse with a traffic cop, for example.
Right. So they had things on that said site flow and one that said aftercare and one that said. But it was a very nice collaborative effort. It was very interesting also to note they had done a great job pulling together resources for this. We're sitting in these chairs afterwards, waiting out our 15 minutes with a big clock, a digital clock in front of us, displaying the time when you sat down so you could track it. And with big signs up in multiple languages that said, if not feeling well, raise your hand. But I noticed that half of the chairs had our county parks and recreation department label on them. They had borrowed chairs from the parks department. There were wheelchairs there from the local hospitals that had been donated. All this equipment had been pulled together. So somebody did a fantastic logistics job putting it all together. And
right, which is great, and awesome. Again, kudos to the local folks who are.
I hope everyone
doing that. I remember when we had these mass vaccination drills 10 years ago that I was involved with. Everybody had some sort of label so that you knew what everybody was. One was actually labeled SME for subject matter expert.
Oh.
I got to wear that one.
Hey.
And then somebody else would be, health department, and somebody else would be labeled victim.
I'm just always seen as a victim.
A vaccine recipient or whatever, and so you could tell who was who. And then we invited the public to participate so that they got a sense of what was going on. So this particular area of the country, this particular surrounding the Danbury area, has actually been practicing these things for about 10 years.
Okay, well, good.
Including using our local mall parking lot, an idea we came up with about 10 years ago. 15 years ago, so to use that as the mass vaccination site. Well, one of the problems is, though, it was designed for car flow. So you have to be able to drive in order to use the site, and they guarantee you that you can only get there because they want to keep the flow up. You have to get the vaccine administered in your left arm. I'm left-handed. I always get the vaccine in my right arm just in case there are reactions. But you can't do that in the car. They don't let you.
They don't, even if you say, I object and
turn
around.
You have to drive a London cab in order to get your
postal vehicle. Yeah, so all the postal workers are, perhaps they're upset. Or maybe they should just hire
they shouldn't take
people.
their cars there because you need really long arms to get your left arm, if you're in line.
Yeah, so has that been your experience that if you drive up and say, can you please, and you turn in the seat somehow, they'll say, no.
They really don't want you to do that, and there's notices all over your, this is how the clinic works. Please cooperate. It's going to be in your left arm. Stay in your car. There's that and everything else.
We were inside.
They're doing hundreds and hundreds of people an hour, and it's a great way to get everybody vaccinated. I get all of that, But when I saw that, I said, you know what? For my second shot, I think I'm going to reschedule and do it in a smaller venue where I could sit in a chair and tell them which arm I want. And, people are like that. Some people are actually choosing vaccines. We talked about that on the show last week. Other people are talking about the venues.
Right.
And so whatever works for you. As the vaccine becomes, or, maybe you want J&J one and done, the more vaccine supply becomes available, the more choices you're going to have as to how you want to do it, which is fine. And that's part of this message of the focus group as well. Don't feel that if you're in a rural area, we're telling you have to get the J&J because the so-called inferior vaccine is for you because you're a logistic headache. That's terrible. What makes more sense is you can get whichever one you want. J&J is convenient, but hey, if you want the other one, fine. We'll just figure out a way to get it to you.
Yeah, I guess. Well, that would certainly be ideal. Now that I think about it, we were, of course, indoors at this place, so we had to get out of the cars and go in and file through into the Nordstroms, the old Nordstroms. And it never occurred to me to ask about getting it in the other arm because I was fine with it in the left arm. But I guess the seats were, besides the little vaccination tables, I don't know if there was a seat on the other side if I had wanted it. And I didn't bother asking. I suppose because you're there with one person administering it, they might accommodate you by saying, sure.
Yeah, I was sitting and they were facing me, and so it didn't really matter where the table was.
Yeah, but in the car,
In the car, it doesn't work out so well.
Right. Now, that's interesting. Well, okay, so maybe one point for getting out of the car for this. And I imagine that a more urgent, immediate vaccine type situation like you were imagining in a drill would be a lot more like, we really just need to keep people moving and flowing here.
Right. We were doing it for flu vaccines. It was for a flu pandemic. So that was the theme. And we were well aware of vaccine hesitancy, but the idea was if you actually were there to get a vaccine, we weren't dealing with that in that moment.
Yeah.
It was just how do you move people as quickly as possible so you can get everybody.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's an interesting thing to think about. Well, logistics fascinating. Whenever you get down to the
and one of the reasons your clinic moves so well is because for 10, 15 years, people have been practicing how to do this. I'm just saying.
It was really well done, I thought. So kudos to them. And I don't know. I guess I should go around asking left-handed people what they experienced, whether that was any different. But so far, so good. So, and I got another appointment for April 3rd. I'm glad it wasn't April 1st. I wouldn't have known whether to show up or not.
Right. Again, one of the subtle differences between the vaccines is that the Pfizer gap is smaller than the Moderna gap, 3 weeks versus 4 weeks.
Oh, okay.
So even though I got my vaccine before you got your first, I'm getting my second one slightly after you're getting your second one.
Okay. Well, if that makes a difference to you and you have a choice, now you have some more information to go for. I think I had it backwards in my head that maybe Moderna was 2 weeks and Pfizer was 3. But
Moderna's a month.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well,
J&J, you don't have that issue. It's one and done.
That's true. I feel like they should have you come back for a ghost second vaccination just to make it feel like it's not inferior. But
yeah, well, whatever. They can inject you with saline, or you can just say hi to the nurses, and nobody will care because everybody's vaccinated at that point, right?
Yeah. Well, people, I imagine, would rather not go.
For your second vaccine, we're having Frank Luntz do it.
He's
He'll ask you a
the
few
most
questions
popular
while you get your
influencer.
saline shot in your arm, but that way you'll feel like you're participating. So this is an article in USA Today.
Yes, let's take a look.
Just published this morning, so I haven't finished reading it. America Divided: Why It's Dangerous to Public Distrust in Civic Institutions is Growing. Americans shift inward. They also worry that society is fraying. In other words, they have more confidence in themselves and less confidence in society. And what's interesting about that is that Biden is deliberately taking on the idea that Reagan put forward, that the government is here to help is a bad thing, and he's going to push the idea that the government is here to help is a good thing, and that without government, you don't get clean water in Mississippi or Texas, and that infrastructure is important. It's part of all of us. Obama was right that you didn't build that. We all built that together. The vaccine issue is part of this. So if he succeeds in convincing some of the recalcitrant people that maybe it is a good idea, and don't do it because I say so, do it because Tom Frieden and your local pastor says so, fine. That will help with the next idea of, now that that's done, let's look at government as a whole, switch to infrastructure, and start looking at some of the things that need to be changed. Now, infrastructure is something everybody can sign on to. So voting rights and, gun background checks might be not first, because you got to get, to build to that. You have to build the idea that we can do these things together if we just sit down and do it. And, one of the interesting ways that happens both at the macro and micro level, for example, is trying to take on the fact that Congress itself is totally dysfunctional, but it's now dysfunctional for a new reason. We have the old reason, which is this interesting article in The Hill, of all places, which I haven't seen reported anywhere else, how Dick Durbin has basically turned to Jeff Merkley and said, you do the filibuster reform.
Hey, okay, that's not
you have good track record. People trust you on the other side of the aisle. You talk to everybody. You've been working on this for some years now. And you do it. I'm not doing it. It's not that I don't have any input, Durbin said, but Merkley's basically, the guy.
All right. Yeah, he's got a background for it. I certainly recall spending enough time talking with him in our initial rounds of working the Senate ranks for filibuster reform years ago. But prior to that, he's got experience running a legislative body. He was top leadership in his state legislature for some years before arriving in the Senate. So he's got some experience in terms of, organizing a place like that, figuring out who needs outreach for stragglers, for bringing them along, and just procedurally what it does to a legislative body when you make changes like this.
Right. So very interesting there. I found that actually more enlightening than a lot of Democrats are trying to round themselves up to decide what to do, and they haven't decided what to do, which is essentially, you don't even have to read the article. Every article says that. This actually had more details about how are they going to try and do this.
All right, good.
Right. Norm Ornstein's article we did last week about some of the subtle changes you could make was also helpful. But Merkley's basically one of the quotes from the article was Joe Manchin said, I really like that Merkley's doing this. I know I have my opinions, but I like listening to him because he's really thinking about this.
Okay, and Frank Luntz didn't even have to ask Manchin any questions. They figured out the answers.
Or give him a vaccine. So while that's going on,
I think they might
you have this other thing which is also going on, which major issue, of course, and this is Leanne Caldwell with a recent report on the 14th, March 14th, Pi Day.
Oh, right. Forgot. We missed
House
that.
Democrats draw the line, no bipartisan cooperation with Republicans who questioned the election.
Oh.
And that's in the House.
Yeah.
And we talked about the fact that the so-called House filibuster of yesteryear is gone.
Right.
That was basically manipulating blockage by roll call.
Right.
If you recall. It was a very interesting period of time where only yes or no votes counted. And if you were present, it didn't count. So if you wanted to block stuff in the House, you could just not give a yes or a no answer. And they got rid of that 100 years ago. So the House Democrats can say whatever they want to about cooperation with the other side of the aisle. It doesn't matter in the Senate. It's a different body. It's a different issue. It's a different animal. House Democrats draw the line, no bipartisan cooperation with Republicans who questioned the election. After the January 6th riot, some Democrats say they simply can't work with anybody who voted against certifying the election. And fine, it's a House story. But I promise you, those sentiments exist in the Senate too. There are people in the Senate on the Democratic side who look askance at every time they see one of the Republican folks who voted to, a Ted Cruz or a Josh Hawley and think to themselves, how am I supposed to work with these people?
Oh, yes.
And that sentiment is happening at the same time that Merkley's trying to pull people together and get some sort of consensus on the filibuster. Well, probably the best way to look at it is to say, okay, fine, he only needs 60 votes, not 100. So if Hawley and Cruz want to be in the 40, I don't have to work with them.
Yeah, if you can find 10, the problem is they often cannot.
Right, and that's where they're at right now, and that's why Merkley's job is so interesting at this particular point in time. But I'm just saying that complicating Merkley and Durbin's job right now, and Schumer's, in finding those 10 votes, is the fact that Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate really don't trust each other, and January 6th didn't help.
Well, no. It was pretty much I would guess the final straw for a lot of people. Yep, you're right, though. They don't have the same luxury exactly in the Senate, but that doesn't mean they don't want to work that way and want to seek to, I don't know if we would say seek to avoid working with people who...
I'd just rather Hawley not be a co-sponsor.
Yeah.
Let me just say that, okay?
Yeah.
You figure out why.
That's fine, and I mean,
it's okay with Cruz. Everybody understands why I don't want to co-sponsor anything with Cruz. Everybody hates Cruz, but
right. Well,
I don't want to do it with Hawley either.
Right. Hawley's just in the early stages of becoming a Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz has been around long enough for people to figure out. I don't like him for substantive reasons. And at this point, there's lots of substantive reason for Hawley, but slow-moving body, and they're probably like, I really just haven't had much experience with this guy. But I'm getting the feeling I'm eventually going to think of him the way I think of Ted Cruz.
Right, and that is exactly the difference between them. The old Ted Cruz joke is true. Why do people take an instant dislike to Ted Cruz? Because it saves time. With Hawley, you have to get to know him a little bit to start to hate him.
Well, it was always true that way for Cruz, too. He had to show people that this was worth doing, hating him from the outset. And then it just became habit.
No, it was immediate.
Brand new. Well, wasn't you think?
What school did you go to?
Oh, well, it's a possibility. I mean, there are some people who are more repulsive than others.
Even if it was an Ivy, it wasn't one of the top Ivies. So I don't have to talk to you. Hey, who are you? I'm Ted Cruz. What school did you go to? It's immediate.
Okay. Well, all right, then. I suppose Hawley has the advantage there, although I think he undid it by saluting the insurrectionists.
Right. So just to finish up, a little bit of lightning round here. So we have some substantive issues that are happening now that this big bill has been signed. A lot of people are referring to it as COVID relief, I'm happy to say. I see very little other than Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal referring to it as stimulus, but checks are starting to arrive already.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And,
from some people who got some money over the weekend.
Right. Who was it? It was, I think, Zach Petikanis.
Okay, I'll believe that.
Who had an interesting tweet. I'll see if I could find it.
Yes, let's. This is us trying to find it.
This is us trying to find it, right. Basically, well, I can't find it, but basically to the effect that people are sitting around the table and saying, I see Biden signed this bill, and it looks like we're going to get a lot of money. Yeah, as a matter of fact, our schools are going to get a lot of money too, and that's going to help us open up really soon. And the economy looks like it's really going to start to grow in a big way. Yeah, but, I still can't get rid of those nagging doubts that Joe Biden hasn't had a press conference.
Yeah, I did see that one. Hey, I just found it, and you were right. It is Zach Petkanis. Is that right? Do I have his pronunciation correct? I find it. There it is. Okay. So
very good tweet. Very funny and very true.
Well put.
And Peter Baker was leading the charge of Joe Biden hasn't had a press. Nobody cares that Joe Biden hasn't had a press.
Quite amazing. Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, Jen Psaki is having press conferences every day, and you're not covering them. So shut up and go to that. And David Frum actually had a whole series of tweets about that, which I thought was rather interesting, because he basically makes the case that it's a wonderful thing that Joe Biden is not having press conferences. And one of the points he makes is going to be right in line with what we were talking about here on the show, which is that assertive presidential leadership can polarize something that otherwise would be broadly unifying. For example, the reason we had a Marshall Plan instead of a Truman Plan — Marshall was the Secretary of State, George Marshall — was that President Truman's name excited strong partisan feelings. That goes right along with what we were talking about with the Luntz focus group.
Yeah.
About vaccines. True. You don't necessarily want to call it, we're going to call it the Obama Recovery Act.
Right.
Okay, fine. As a nod to the other side with my bipartisanship, I'll call it the Trump Recovery Act. Well, that's even worse.
Right.
You don't want your name on it at all. So we saw this in the Obama and Trump years, Frum says. Mm-hmm. People might not have an opinion over the program, but you have strong feelings about Obama and Trump. Which do you prefer, the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare? Oh, I take the Affordable Care Act every time. Okay, fine. Right. It's the same frickin' thing. Yes, but the other one has Obama's name on it, so I hate it.
Yeah. Right. Well, okay. That's
right?
understandable.
Attach the high-intensity name, Frum says, and the merits of the program get lost. By keeping a low profile, Biden is de-escalating and depolarizing politics, a smart move, especially at a time when the supreme national priority is to get everybody of all points of view vaccinated as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. So that fits right into what we were just talking about. So reason number 2 that it's okay that Biden doesn't give press conferences is the presidency is an ensemble performance, not a one-man show. Putting a cast member on the White House press stage underscores that truth. It teaches the public how the government works and how the government should work. Yeah. People on Twitter often complain of the Green Lantern theory of the presidency, that the president can achieve things by sheer willpower. Americans need to see that other people in government beside the president also make decisions and have to answer for those decisions. Jared Kushner. Reporters get more useful information from operational officials than they possibly can get from the president and are less tempted into performative stunts. Nobody says to a reporter, hey, great, you really tripped up the IRS commissioner with that gaffe.
Right. Well, that's why they want the – okay.
Right? When you put on the White House stage the official with direct operational responsibility, you incentivize reporters to try to extract useful information, not to generate viral video. In other words, you make them talk about policy, not politics. They hate that.
Yeah, that's the best explanation I can think of for why do they keep insisting that it's an important thing that he's gone X days or whatever without a press conference. I don't feel underinformed, so what's up?
Right. Now, this is David Frum the ex-Republican conservative speaking. Reason number 4 is, for me, a top concern about the Biden presidency was, would this highly emotional and often over-talkative man muster the self-discipline required to succeed at this job? By not talking, Biden's already answered the most urgent question I had. Yes, he does.
Okay.
The end. So all good points. And no, it's okay that he doesn't have press conferences. It's really okay. We're not starving for them. In fact, somebody else put together a whole list of comparing previous presidents to Biden at this particular stage in their presidency and relations with the press. And they broke down not only formal press conferences, his predecessors have had 1 or 2, he's had none, but also informal get-togethers, the gaggle, where reporters get to ask questions.
Yes.
And his predecessors had 3 or 4, and Biden has had 37.
That seems like you've plenty of access.
Right. So the whole thing is stupid.
It does feel that way, and it does feel like I think they explained it pretty well there. The only reason I could think of them harping about a solo press conference, they've been so specific in their charge. Well, he hasn't had a solo press conference.
And that's important because I, as chief reporter, those are the ones I get assigned to.
I guess that's true. And
I don't go to talk to the IRS commissioner. That's for an intern.
Yeah. They want a press conference where he's on the hot seat in the spotlight and can't turn to anyone else for advice. And so I guess that they think, well, that will reveal how much of a command of the material he personally has, which is a little, useless. But I guess it helps maybe with some sort of insight.
But performative is absolutely right. During his address to the nation, when he was talking about the coronavirus relief bill that was signed, and also mourning the deaths of 500,000 Americans, and also talking about the fact that Asian American discrimination was getting to the point where people are getting killed over it and it has to stop, with a serious adult, face-to-face, heart-to-heart talk with the country, not a victory lap. As soon as he was done, CNN started yelling questions at him as if it were a press conference.
Well, that's what
they want to do. They want to be the performative part, not the time, not the place.
He gives an interesting and engaging and important speech. No tangents about who he was on yachts with or anything like that. or fake friends that don't go to Paris anymore. It was all pretty cogent, and I guess they just couldn't deal with it. It's pretty weird that they want this solo thing. Also, I'm just thinking of the advice that you gave early on. What's the number one problem in the country? I think everybody would say, well, his chief priority's got to be the pandemic. And what does the good playbook, the actual playbook, say about speaking about the pandemic? It said, don't center the politicians, you center the subject matter experts. And what's the issue here? We want more politicians. Really? And one in particular. Why? Because then I get on TV asking him questions. Weird. Because you get on TV, you would be on TV asking Jen Psaki questions if you would cover the damn thing. What's the problem with that?
Right.
I don't know. Boring somehow.
Anyway, that's my rant for today.
Man. All right. Well, it's a good one. Thank you very much. And we'll check in with you again on Wednesday, right? We have to skip a day in order to, I don't know, build up anticipation for it. So
something like that.
We'll do something. And, we should have some sort of fanfare for when you come back on Wednesday. And, all right, I think that
Remember,
does it.
Wednesday's garbage day, so Abby will be involved.
Yes,
around 9:45 or 9:50, she'll start to bark. I'm just telling the audience to expect it.
Okay.
But we've made some major administrative changes to infrastructure in the house, so you'll notice the laundry room isn't going at the moment.
Ah, nice. Okay.
We learned how to set the thing to go off at 10 o'clock instead of 9:30.
Oh, was it set before? That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that explains it. Easy fix then. Yeah. Technology. Okay. Right. Appreciate it.
We figured out how to set it to 9:30 when we got it, and then we didn't remember how to change it. So it was,
that's one of those.
I know it's noisy, but I don't have any choice here. I can't move it. It's too big.
I gotta walk around in wet clothes just for you, Okay, well, good. Now we figured that out. I got to figure out. I think at one point I learned how to silence the phones here, and they don't ring here now. So that's my part. So very good. And,
do not try this at home, folks. We are thorough professionals.
Oh yeah, it only took like 8 years to get this. So it works pretty good. Okay, thanks, Greg. And we'll be back in just a minute. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Man, maybe we should make that top of the hour thing 2 minutes too. It seems like too short, but there's so much to get to. We thought we would come right back and bring you back up to date. Yes, one of the stories mentioned briefly at the top of the show, the vaccination rate in Congress apparently languishing. Oh, and people falling down the stairs. The production crew is falling down the stairs here. And we're on one floor. So, the house has plenty of stairs. I don't know. But the production studio, such as it is on one floor. What? Oh, this is the one step that we have?
Not the step.
Oh, what?
The exercise machine. And amps and
what are you doing over there? That's not where your computer is. Go back there. Get back to work. All right. Well, yeah, it's okay. The floor is strewn with our son still at home having his. We're now on like a year of remote music lessons, and we've moved on to electrifying the guitar at this point. But then we had some problems, and it wasn't working right. We had to test everything and all the cables and all the amps and everything. So there's 2 amps sitting around here in the way of everything. Anyway, that's not news, but it explains the weird noises in the background. I was going to talk more about this. The vaccines in particular in the House. Axios, I guess, reported that this morning, yesterday, I don't know, yesterday evening, and I guess it's only getting the rounds now this morning. Vaccine brawl riles House, reports Kadia, is that right? Kadia, 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 Goba. And, let's get to the reporting, why don't we? Uncertainty about why only 75% of the House is confirmed as vaccinated against the coronavirus is fueling a debate about when the chamber can return to its normal rules of operation. This is actually quite important for that reason. And something that Rebecca Romans pointed out for me this morning, although pointing to Raw Stories coverage of the same story, I believe. Yeah, the raw story referring to the Axios reportage here. But Rebecca's comment, probably on your mind too. I thought all these greedy bastards jumped to the head of the line when the vaccines came out. How is it that they're only 75% vaccinated? That's part of the story. Yeah, a lot of them did get vaccinated early, and we made a nice excuse for them, and I thought it made a certain amount of sense why you would be vaccinating members of the House and their staff and administrative staff in the Congress first, and is it jumping the line? And to a certain extent it is, but a fairly vital function of government to be able to have Congress get together and vote on things. And so it made a certain amount of sense. So I guess leave it to the vaccine hesitant Republicans to screw that up and refuse the vaccine, even though it's sitting there for their exclusive use. And they could be vaccinated at any time, and they have a nice, I'm sure, doctors and nurses that they can talk to about any questions, but they don't have any legitimate questions. They just have outright, opposition to it. And part of it may be political in the sense that they're, still buying into Trump and QAnon and weird conspiracy theories about the vaccine, or weird conspiracy theories about, if not the vaccine itself, then about the virus itself. And so they're creating problems. But in addition, they're creating problems even without, you don't have to necessarily believe in any of that nonsense to find a political reason to refuse the vaccine. In that, we've mentioned this a couple of times on the show when we're talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene and her disruptive calls for adjournment, and what that's done to the House. That ordinarily it's an annoyance, to be sure, but there's no chance that the House is going to show up and vote and agree that they ought to be adjourning instead of doing their work. So that's not the issue. The issue has been that since the House has still got the pandemic and the dangers involved in it to deal with, they have adopted voting procedures that instead of simply ringing the bells as they do in the House, and you don't hear that when you're listening on C-SPAN, and telling everybody it's time to come and vote, and leaving the vote open for 15 minutes, and they never really finish in 15 minutes, but leaving the vote open for whatever amount of time, and everybody shows up, and you walk over to the Capitol from the House office buildings, and you walk onto the floor and put your card in and vote. And Republicans have managed to make a mess of this system that has worked fairly well for quite some time by, one, encouraging an insurrection to overrun and sack the Capitol and threaten to kill the then Vice President of the United States and the top leadership of Congress. Now, two, insisting on carrying their own guns to the House floor with them because they need protection. And by the way, who do they need protection from? This plays into something else that we forgot to mention that was happening over the weekend. Senator Ron Johnson, again, saying the quiet part out loud and telling somebody somewhere, I guess I'll dig up the provenance of this and figure out who he was talking to, but telling someone somewhere that, well, you see, I wasn't scared on January 6th because the insurrectionists were patriots who love their country. Now, if they had been Black Lives Matter activists or Antifa, then I would have been frightened because they would have been interested in killing me, because that's really the main aim of those two, I can't even really call them groups or organizations, but movements. And, of course, that's a total misreading of what they're about. And it's intentional because there's a political benefit to him from perpetuating that incorrect information, but also, points out, well, I'm scared of black people. That would have worried me, but I'm not scared of white people, because when white people take over the Capitol with guns and murder police officers, they're doing it for patriotism. Well, anyway, there's lots of layers at which we can analyze that rather startling admission. But it was also kind of annoying and upsetting because I observed, and several others did on Twitter as well. Wasn't it just like last week before that Ron Johnson was saying that it really was Black Lives Matter and Antifa activists who actually sacked the Capitol and not the patriots and white Americans that he loves so much? Yes, he was. And then when that didn't fly, he said, all right, fine, I can't convince people that it wasn't Trump supporters who sacked the Capitol, so therefore I have only this to say about it. That's why I wasn't scared, which is also interesting because over here on the House side, you have so many members insisting that they're going to be carrying their guns, and it never made any sense for them to be doing that, of course, but they don't really care about it making sense. But they had for a while the excuse of saying, well, I'm carrying guns because, hey, you just saw what happened here on January 6th. They sacked the Capitol. I need to be able to protect myself if weirdos start barging in here, attempting to kill us. But, of course, Ron Johnson says there's nothing to worry about because they're patriots like you. Which, of course, I mean, everybody kind of recognizes that the Lauren Boeberts and Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Madison Cawthorns of the world would be most comfortable and quite at home among the people who did, in fact, sack the Capitol on January 6th. And, of course, we also know that at least one of them was likely helping them do it at the time. And yet they insist, I'm carrying guns to protect myself from these people from whom I need no protection because they're good friends of mine and I showed them how to sack the Capitol. But then again, they would also say, well, you know that was never really the reason I was carrying my gun in the first place. The reason I'm carrying my gun is I like guns and I think they're fun and they get me elected. And if I do stupid, weird stunts with guns on, that's the sort of thing that my base back home cheers for, and I'll be able to raise money with it, and so I'm going to continue doing it. But back to the story here. So now we all have to go through metal detectors to get onto the floor to vote, and occasionally, I don't know whether they ever worked this out or not, but I think they maybe gave up too soon, but I don't know whether they ever came up with any procedures for the Capitol Police as to what to do with members of Congress who would insist on bypassing the metal detectors, because it wasn't clear from the beginning that they were empowered, the police, to do anything to prevent members from going onto the floor unless they were checked. Because there were at least semi-serious constitutional objections being made that really needed to be settled somehow and discussed among the lawyers, and maybe they're still working on it, I don't know. But as it is, going through the metal detectors makes it very difficult to get onto the floor and vote in the timetable we're used to seeing from the before times, where people could just walk in and vote all at once. It didn't matter whether they were all on the floor at the same time. Now they have staggered groups. And I don't know what the logistics are for how they do it, whether they count people on the way in or anything like that, but it now takes 45 minutes minimum to do what they used to claim to be able to do in 15. And the bad news is that when they used to put 15 minutes on the clock, it used to regularly take 45 minutes for them to vote anyway. Now that they say they have to allow at least 45 minutes for a vote to take place, you can imagine it probably would take a lot longer in reality to do. So that makes Marjorie Taylor Greene's tactic, such as it is, that much more effective, at least in terms of time wasting. Every time she suggests that they ought to have a vote on a motion to adjourn, it can delay the House for an hour or more, because not only do they have to stagger the voting, not only do they have to have the stupid vote, which they shouldn't have to have, but they have to stagger the voting because of coronavirus. And on top of that, because a handful of Republican lunatics are unreliable in terms of respecting the rules that are in place for keeping everybody physically safe from gunshot wounds while they're on the floor. They're, purposefully ignoring that as well. And that's creating even more of a problem. So, all right. Well, at any rate, Axios wrote this up and has taken all of that into account. This next section about this between the lines, how they break things up into their handy-dandy bullet points and and subheaders. The other 25% of members, that is the 25% of members of the House still unvaccinated, have either refused to get the vaccine. Do you remember that this was about vaccines at the beginning? They've either refused to get the vaccine or have not reported getting it at home or are avoiding it because of medical conditions. I'm sure that there are at least some legitimate medical excuses for not getting the vaccine, but I imagine that that's a very tiny minority, even of this 25% minority. Until the Office of the Attending Physician is clear about this, it can't make recommendations regarding the modification or relaxation of existing social distancing guidelines. So just by refusing to report what your status is, you can screw up the Office of the Attending Physician. Although perhaps they might want to say something like, if you don't give us this information, we can't treat you. Like for anything, because it's a really important perk for most members. The Office of the Attending Physician makes their lives an awful lot easier, and there's a real reason for having it. But a lot of them depend on it for immediate and primary care options. You will recall that this is a heavily subsidized service that essentially offers to members of Congress on-site, all-you-can-eat primary medical care, up to and including a lot of diagnostic testing, for, I think, $500 out of pocket per year, so that if your regular doctor at home tells you need, even something up to and including stuff like MRIs, but you're only at home for the weekend and it's really inconvenient to schedule while you're there and your schedule is packed as it is, you can arrange to have that through the Office of the Attending Physician. I don't know that they have an MRI machine right on the premises there, but they can certainly, sometimes they can even bring in diagnostic equipment when they get some advance notice and say, are you going to need this? We'll bring it in. But they can get you to the Walter Reed Medical Complex and take care of things there. It's a tremendous convenience. And everything from a quick checkup to getting the vaccine to follow-up care for some problem that you're having, or I'm not feeling well, or you need some real diagnostic imaging. They can take care of all that stuff, and you can continue working. So, there's some benefits to the country, when you consider that, at least in the past, most members of Congress were there to, even if they were making a mess of it, they were doing public business there. Now, of course, there's less and less of that every day, thanks to stunts like Marjorie Taylor Greene's and the rest of them. But they might say to them, well, this convenience doesn't, it disappears for you because it would be a legit excuse, right? I'm a physician. I'll even serve as your physician, working as I am in the Office of the Attending Physician to Congress. But here's the thing. Like with most other physicians, if I don't have complete information or relatively complete information about your medical status, I can't help you. So I guess they could try that one too. Are you vaccinated? I refuse to say. Well, you know what? I can't really work with you on this one. You're going to have to go and talk to a doctor that you're willing to talk to about whether or not you're vaccinated and let them help you. That might change their minds. But I don't know. Maybe not. Anyway, let's see. We'll go on with the rest of the reporting here. Congress has its own supply of the coronavirus vaccine, which I guess means that they have some really super cold freezers somewhere. While it's not certain which party is most to blame for any vaccine hesitancy. Now, that's a false statement. I mean, we can all guess as to what is the party affiliation of the bulk of this 25% of unreported or unvaccinated people. I think we can all guess it's Republicans. But that's the question they thought they were posing. But the question they actually posed here is, it's not certain which party is most to blame, not for which party has most people unvaccinated, but which party is most to blame for vaccine hesitancy. The answer to that is also Republicans, even if it's not the vaccine hesitancy of these same members of Congress that you're talking about. Who's to blame for anti-vaccine hesitancy? The answer, Republicans. but they pose it like it's a question that can't be answered. The phenomenon, they note, is higher among white Republicans than among other demographic groups, as Axios has previously reported. Here a comment from the famously a-hole-ish Madison Cawthorn. I won't be taking it. The survival rate is too high for me to want it, as 25-year-old Madison Cawthorn would have it. That is to say, too few 25-year-olds are dying from coronavirus for him to want to risk taking the vaccine. And here I will agree with him. At least too few 25-year-olds have died from coronavirus. I think I would agree with Madison on that one. We would probably disagree as to how that could be resolved. I'm sure that he would say that it should be someone else. I would say it should squarely fall on him, and that Madison Cawthorn's mind should properly be changed about this by his death from the coronavirus. I feel confident in saying that. He would disagree with me, but there you have it. We'll just have to agree to disagree. Next up, why it matters. You'd think that would be at the top of the article, but it's not. Multiple waves of voting meant to ensure social distancing inside the House chamber are slowing a full legislative schedule. It's giving power to disruptors like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who used a procedural vote, or who has used a procedural move to further drag out the process and continues to do so. Votes can take more than 3 times longer than pre-pandemic times. Majority Leader Steny Hoyer and Minority Whip Steve Scalise have had a lively debate on the House floor about reopening. Happened on Thursday. Now that we have seen from reports that roughly 75% of all members in the House have had a vaccination for COVID-19, there's a strong desire to get back to the regular floor schedule, said Scalise. And Hoyer responds, it would be a lot simpler if every member had been vaccinated. The CDC's most recent guidelines suggest avoiding large events and gatherings when possible. Let's see, is there more about this? Yes. Kevin McCarthy sent a letter to Nancy Pelosi last Wednesday asking for timelines of when the House will end proxy voting and extended voting sessions and resume full-time in-person committee hearings. Simply put, he says, it's time that we return to regular order. The House Republicans are eager for the chance to reopen the People's House, restore America's voice in Congress, and da-da-da-da-da. Do you really want to hear the flowery language he puts on all this? Especially given that it's the Republican vaccine hesitancy that's preventing it. So once again, causing problems and then casting about, look, oh, well, I don't know why this is happening. When are we going to get back to regular order? When can we reopen? When can schools open? Well, vaccinate the teachers. No, we shouldn't vaccinate teachers. We should just open schools. Why? For what reason? I mean, on what basis? The reason, I don't know. The whole thing was a hoax. That's why. Well, anyway, let's see. Hoyer answers some of McCarthy's objections. The House continues to conduct business in accordance with public health guidelines and in consultation with the Office of the Attending Physician. Hoyer spokesperson Margaret Mulcairn said in a statement to Axios, and if you want to keep track of the players at home, the health and safety of members, legislative staff, journalists, and House employees remains paramount. What's up next? Let's see. A memo sent last by... Is that right? Memo sent last what? I think they left out the day. But it was last sent by the Office of the Attending Physician. Prior to that, it had been sent around by the Sanitation Department, I guess. That's the upshot of this with typo. Anyway, memo sent by the Office of the Attending Physician, obtained by Axios, urged continued social distancing and mask wearing by members. The office cares for those in the House and Senate as well as the Supreme Court, in case you had forgotten about that. The OAP urged members who had received vaccinations from outside the OAP's domain to report them. And in addition, the office said members who had previously contracted COVID-19 are strongly encouraged to complete a full SARS-CoV-2 vaccination course at the earliest possible opportunity. So Rand Paul probably running around saying, I don't need a vaccine. I've already had the disease and recovered from it. And apparently the medical science is different. But, you know, he pretends to be his own doctor and is walking around without a mask. Anyway, bottom line is the OAP has reinstated the use of the congressional gym and showers and locker room and swimming pool on Friday evening, according to the memo. So Rand Paul will be happy about that. So you'd think then he would give a little too. I'll tell you what, we'll reinstate the use of the congressional gym, and all you have to do is either get vaccinated or show us some documentation that you've been vaccinated elsewhere. And he says, great, thanks for the concession. No. So as always, a real pleasure working with congressional Republicans. All right. Let's see. Other things to pick up on and report from over the weekend. Well, we got a couple of things. This was an interesting report, I thought. I'd like to read through this one, perhaps. Yeah, not terribly overlong. A piece from Politico, which will disappoint many of you. But I saw this over the weekend. Who's responsible for this one? Gabby Orr and Meredith McGraw. With this piece I saw commented on by Sam Stein over the weekend via Twitter. Trump was supposed to be a political Godzilla in exile. Instead, he's adrift. The subheader reading, even allies say the president is lacking an apparatus and direction as he sorts out just what he wants to do in his post-presidency. What I found interesting about that was, I can't even remember what Sam Stein's comment specifically was, but it wasn't defensive or anything, but it directed me to the article and prompted me to look at it and read it. Let's see, here's, oh no, I guess I didn't respond to Sam's tweet about it, but maybe I can find it. But anyway, he had made some comment about his being adrift politically in his post-presidency. And I was commenting, well, it seems to me like this impotence was actually really a large part of what his presidency was about too. But we are, most of us, press corps, chief among us, but many of us inside or outside of the press corps, conditioned to pretend that it can never be the case, that it's like physically impossible for a sitting president of the United States to in fact be politically impotent because, he's the leader of the free world, as we came to call him. But, if you have no real political instincts in terms of how to govern, I mean, you have, I guess you could call what he's got some campaign trail political instincts. He did manage to get a lot of people to vote for him, even though it wasn't most of the people in the country, et cetera, et cetera. And he's certainly convinced a large portion of the country to do things that don't make any logical sense based on nothing other than the fact that he says it. So I don't know where else you would lay the blame. But at any rate, this idea that he was supposed to be a political Godzilla in exile and he was going to terrorize even the Republican ranks and whip them back into shape and show up as a candidate again in 2024. Not only did it not materialize, but none of what he was supposed to be a political Godzilla about as president ever really materialized either. And I think it was, it's disappointing that nobody else is coming to this realization as well. But anyway, we got a minute or two before we duck out for our next break and give you an idea of what they're talking about here. He backed away from creating a third party and has soured on the costly prospect of launching his own TV empire or social media startup. Remember when that was the threat? His vow to target disloyal Republicans with personally recruited primary challengers has taken a back seat to conventional endorsements of senators who refuse to indulge his quest to overturn the 2020 election. So he's not even withholding that magical endorsement from anybody. And though he was supposed to build a massive political apparatus to keep his MAGA movement afloat, it's unclear to Republicans what his PAC is actually doing beyond entangling itself with, I've lost my spot, entangling itself with disputes with Republican icons and the party's fundraising arms. So all he's really managed to do when he's decided it's time for me to start getting attention again is getting attention by fighting with and splitting the take that was out there for the Republican fundraising arms. He's undermining Republican fundraising, hoovering up as much of that money as he can for his PAC, and then doing nothing with it. I mean, he's eventually stuffing it in his own pockets, and that's what he was always about. But I don't know, I guess some of the people here thought that he was really going to have a political movement instead of stealing money. Duh. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Okay. Let me continue on here with this idea from the Politico piece. I should have used the 2 minutes to look for the Sam Stein quote, but I don't think there was anything particularly offensive about it. I think that there was a broader view you could take of what was in this article in Politico. But yes, I guess there were still people out there that thought that he was going to actually build a movement of some kind with the PAC that he established. And, you know, I mean, do they feel foolish now? I don't know. Maybe they haven't come to the realization yet that it was always about just stealing money and redirecting money or laundering political money into personal money, which, I mean, we've been over the mechanism of this 100 times on the show. You know, he raises money at this PAC and he says, if he ever feels like he needs to deliver on the promise of it at all, to be building a movement or backing candidates against Republicans who, you know, voted against him or something, it was always going to be that was always going to be handled by way of holding events, fundraisers for the candidates that he preferred, hosted at Trump properties, such that the campaigns of these individuals, these candidates, would be spending money at Mar-a-Lago and he'd be pocketing that, and or that he would use his PAC money to pay for an event of some kind, fundraiser or otherwise, that he would also take a cut of, but to pay for events to raise money either for his own PAC or for another candidate, but also have it at Mar-a-Lago and convert the political donation money into personal pocket money for himself that way. I don't know how anybody could avoid having learned about that from the past 4 years. But anyway, where do we leave off? He was supposed to build a massive political apparatus, but nobody knows what his PAC is actually doing besides fighting with other Republican icons and party fundraising arms. Ex-President Donald Trump finds himself adrift while in political exile, and Republicans and even some allies say he is disorganized, torn between playing the role of antagonist and party leader. And, I mean, I can't believe that anybody's like, guess what? Brand new story about Donald Trump. He's disorganized and torn as to what his role ought to actually be. Because I feel like he spent the presidency doing that. But institutionally, in particular, the press is just allergic to seeing that, because if it turns out that the most prestigious job in political journalism is being assigned to cover an impotent, befuddled moron who can't get anything done, like is constitutionally, small c, constitutionally incapable of achievement, then you feel like an idiot for having worked your whole life to get to this position. So you're just professionally dedicated to pretending that the president is a juggernaut no matter what, no matter who he is or what he does. And ex-presidents, similarly, are obviously also juggernauts, different in kind, but well worth your time for coverage because they always have been, as opposed to, well, now we have a brand new, different kind of person who's dedicated to not doing any of those things and has never been capable of doing any of those things. But you'll look like a fool for having been assigned to cover him unless you pretend that he's a juggernaut. So they have to. That's kind of where we're stuck here. There is no apparatus, no structure, and part of that is due to a lack of political understanding on Trump's behalf. Part of it, said a person close to the former president, noting that Trump has struggled to learn the ropes of post-presidential politicking. That's interesting and maybe telling all by itself because, I mean, he struggled to learn the ropes of presidential politicking, presidential everything, governing, politicking, all that stuff. But, and that was obvious to everyone, and everyone in the press corps knew that that was the case. But again, also, I don't know, maybe it was professional protection. It might have been something else, but just conditioning, if nothing else. Well, it isn't that he's struggling to learn the ropes. It's that he's a maverick doing things his own way and redefining the roles of the presidency, you see, because that's what a dynamic political leader does. And I'm such a great reporter. I only could possibly be assigned to cover a dynamic political force of nature. It would be a complete embarrassment if I was covering a total loser who didn't know anything about anything, and I would be wasting my 4 years here. And everyone knows that this is the most prestigious job in political journalism, and I have earned it, and goddamn it, this guy is a political force of nature because I need him to be, because if he's not, then I'm an idiot too. And there you have it. The normalizing of the dumbest, least competent person in the world who also happens to be president of the United States. I mean, I was going to say, clearly the worst, dumbest, least informed, least effective president ever, but that's not saying anything. Everybody knows that. It should be, I think, reinforced. We really would like to drive this home. He's a very dumb and incapable person. The fact that he also became president is a double embarrassment to all of us. But it's not enough to simply say he's the worst president ever. That's obvious. He's also would be the worst, whatever, dog walker, babysitter, ice cream truck driver ever. But we went and made him president. Or I guess, no, we didn't really. But the Electoral College, I guess, went and made him president. And that's another problem. But anyway, back to the story. It's like political phantom limbs. This is this person's attempt at explaining this. Political phantom limbs. He doesn't have the same political infrastructure he did 3 months ago as president. May have a point there. Added GOP strategist Matt Gorman, who previously served as communications director for the National Republican Congressional Committee. This is possibly true. And I guess this was originally part of the normalization process where everybody said, it doesn't matter that he's an incapable person who's been made president by the Electoral College. The apparatus around the presidency is such that he can't screw up too badly, which is ironic because originally, I mean, that is, I think, what people's view of the original deep state, if there ever was such a thing, really was. That it didn't matter how incompetent personally the president was. There was just too much infrastructure and institutional infrastructure around the president for them to go too far wrong. So we figured things like a global pandemic, for instance, would be handled more or less appropriately because no president, no matter how incompetent personally, would insert himself in between the professionals and the execution of public health strategy because that would be suicidal. Except that it turned out not to be because we normalized everything along the way, but ordinarily it would, well, he did lose, but I mean, he should have been crushed. Not only should he have been crushed, he should have been dragged out of the White House and murdered. But, I I didn't want to do that. I didn't think that was proper. I didn't want to tell people to do that. I don't want to advocate for that. I'm just surprised that they didn't do it, is all. But anyway, yeah, I mean, he should not ever have felt he was in a position to run for re-election, generally speaking. But okay, he's crazy and he's an idiot, so he's going to do it. But he should have lost 80-20. But he didn't. So I don't know. Maybe he has a point here. But anyway, this guy puts it that way. It's like political phantom limbs. He doesn't have the same political infrastructure he did 3 months ago as president. And there were people, to be sure, who prevented him from doing even dumber things, or who, told him you can't do that, or got in the way of things. And I guess it was their job to try to hammer out stuff and say, well, tell you what, I organized this and you'll like it because of these reasons. Now sign off on it and people will do it. That's true. There are far fewer of those people around him to begin with, because he's not an important person anymore and doesn't exercise political power. So most of those people have left. Also, all those people were paid for by the federal government, and now that's not the case, even though he still gets a stipend for running an office. But he doesn't have people around him who are getting paid from someplace other than his pocket to execute policy ideas or whatever, initiatives, absent his interference. So there is that. The version of Trump that has emerged in the month and a half since he left office is far from the political Godzilla many expected him to be. He was supposed to unleash hell on a party apparatus that recoiled when his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and declined to fiercely defend him during his second impeachment. Instead, Trump has maintained close ties to GOP officials who have committed to supporting incumbents, stayed almost entirely... Well, have I lost the track of this sentence here? Trump has maintained close ties to Republican officials who have committed to supporting incumbents, stayed almost entirely out of the spotlight. Trump has stayed almost entirely out of the spotlight, delivered fairly anodyne remarks the one time he emerged, and offered only sparse criticism of his successor, Joe Biden. The cumulative result is political whiplash as the former president shifts from wanting to support the GOP with his resources and grassroots appeal one day to refocusing on his own brand and thirst for vengeance the next. In the past week alone, Trump has gone from threatening party bodies for using his name and likeness in their fundraising efforts to offering up his Mar-a-Lago estate as a host site for part of the Republican National Committee's spring donor retreat. Simple enough to understand. It looked like he was, making a big deal of himself by saying he was going to fight. And did we even discuss that? I don't know whether we made mention of it at all. That he had, I think so. We must have mentioned it last week, right? Sent a cease and desist letter to the Republican fundraising arms, telling them you can't use my name or likeness without paying for it. And I guess they basically said, oh, that ain't going to happen, and I think we can win the case. So now he's moved to this different stance. Well, if I can't extort money for them by making them pay to use my picture or name in their fundraising materials, then the next best thing is to cozy back up to them so that they will hold their fundraising events at my properties and pay me for that. So that's where he's landed. He savagely attacked veteran Republican operative Karl Rove for criticizing his first presidency speech at the annual CPAC convention, and endorsed Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas, who repeatedly scrutinized Trump's own trade practices while in office. So again, the issue here is creating your own political movement and carving out a position in opposition to the official Republican apparatus is hard work. And if there's one thing we know Trump won't do, it's hard work. So, that was, I think, the obvious prediction. But apparently, we were still busy normalizing him and saying he's a powerful guy that we should totally be covering. And in the span of 2 weeks, Trump went from endorsing his first primary challenger to an incumbent Republican by throwing his support between former White House aide turned congressional candidate Max Miller to hosting a vocal opponent of insurgent primary challenges, Senator Rick Scott, for dinner at Mar-a-Lago. In his role as chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Scott has promised to stick by GOP incumbents, including Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, who voted to convict Trump in his Senate trial last month on charges of inciting an insurrection. The Florida Republican has said he had a great meeting with Trump in a tweet he shared Friday. For any normal politician, it would look like he's trying to have it both ways, but he's really trying to have it his way, said a former Trump White House official. He only cares about maintaining his power and his stranglehold over the Republican Party, and it doesn't matter to him how any of the moves he makes affects the long-term success of institutions or individuals other than himself, which I think it tracks in a parallel track with, what he really cares, bottom line, about is, to the extent that he cares about maintaining power and stranglehold of the Republican Party, it's about having them hold events at his properties and paying him for it. I mean, he'd love it if everybody jumped every time he opened his mouth and did his bidding, but absent the ability to do that, he'll just take the money. Trump has always been an impulsive figure who demanded loyalty from those around him, but those traits have come with positions of power, whether atop a real estate empire, as a media celebrity, or, in its last iteration, as President of the United States. No longer occupying a powerful office, the task has been made more complicated. In other words, it takes work, so we're not going to do it. The former president has appeared to settle into life outside the confines of the West Wing and even made his first trip to New York earlier this week. He continues to hold court on the patio of his Mar-a-Lago resort, where he is greeted by a standing ovation from members when he and the former First Lady walk by. I wonder how long that's going to last. That's got to get tiresome. He spends his days monitoring the news, it's watching TV, making calls, and playing golf at his eponymous club just a few miles away. He has assembled a bare-bones staff of paid and unpaid advisors who say they are working to vet primary candidates seeking his support and get his fundraising operation off the ground. But the factions that have already formed among those surrounding him suggest potential turbulence ahead. 3 veterans of Trump's 2020 campaign, Brad Parscale, Bill Stepien, and Justin Clark, have been screening primary recruitments and brainstorming ways to reestablish his online presence, while Dave Bossie and Corey Lewandowski are in talks with the ex-president to launch a new fundraising entity on his behalf, according to people briefed on the recent discussions. That should be pretty interesting, and they might get attention for that one. He's got at least 2 or 3 out there at the moment, and I guess they figure what they want, Bossie and Lewandowski. Can we start a super PAC that's affiliated with you that we could use for pretty much any purpose, but for including working, tangentially on behalf of the candidates, say, that you endorse, or could be just a regular PAC. But basically what they're looking for is, can we administer it and extract administrative fees from it in order to run it for you? And I guess Parscale, Stepien, and Clark are in the job of, starting a political movement is hard work, and I know you don't want to do it. Could we do it for you in exchange for payment? Bossie and Lewandowski probably have the advantage of being able to say, you don't need to pay us, we'll steal directly from your PAC. At the same time, Trump has continued to phone pals from his real estate days and former White House officials, soliciting their counsel on which Republicans he should try to unseat and whether they approve of the primary challengers he's considering. So again, parallel to what we began this piece with, this is how he ran the White House. So it's kind of more of the same. He spent his time in the White House phoning pals from his real estate days, and he didn't have to phone White House officials because they were right there, but he didn't want to get up and talk to them, so he might have phoned them anyway because they might have been 20 feet away, soliciting their counsel on the dumb thing I want to do now. Tell me what you think about this dumb thing. One former administration official who has been in contact with Trump described him as a pinball, noting that his tendency to abruptly change directions or seize on a new idea after speaking with a friend or outside advisor a habit that often frustrated aides during his time in office, my point, has carried into his post-presidency life. And why did it do that? Because it was his presidential life. And why was it his presidential life? Because it had been his prior life. He's never changed in any of this and won't. You've got Trump making endorsements of people without going through the process he agreed to 3 days ago, said the former White House official. It's really disorganized. Yeah, that's work, right? Who do you want to endorse? I want to endorse candidate A. Why? Because he called me yesterday. Guess what? Candidate B calls him. Today I want to endorse candidate B. Well, you can't endorse A and B. They're running against each other. Well, why not? Because that's stupid. Well, who cares? There's no high tribunal here telling me I can't do it, right? The fear among Republicans is that Trump's indecisiveness will extend to his personal political future as well. Of course it will. Trump has continued to dangle a 2024 run over the party, and the will he, won't he guessing game has held presidential hopefuls in limbo. That's your own fault. If you're held in limbo by that guy, you don't have what it takes to lead the party or the country. Just take my advice. I mean, I know I'm a Democrat, but honestly, I'm right here. Even for you, a Republican. Politics is his hobby, and he's having fun with his hobby in between rounds of golf, said a former Trump advisor. His big test is, does he run again? Because if he doesn't, you'll see people lose interest in the guy in the next hour. As long as he plays the theatrics, he's going to run again. He still garners attention and creates headlines. And that part, I think, is true. And by the way, politics is his hobby. Why is politics his hobby anyway? I mean, yeah, he's a former president, but why did he run for president in between rounds of golf the way he did? And again, he was president in between rounds of golf. He ran for president in between rounds of golf, and he is a post-president in between rounds of golf. Why is this his hobby? Because discussing politics, particularly like at the would-be, wannabe kingmaker level, is considered the smart pursuit of savvy business types. And he wants very badly to be considered to be that. He's not, and he's incapable of maintaining a serious conversation about it. But, again, we're in the business here of normalizing this and pretending that he knows what he's doing and has power, or else covering him feels stupid. But, okay, yes, and he's playing the theatrics that he's going to run again, and he still therefore garners attention and creates headlines. Part of the other happenings of the weekend, the new Republican practice of sharing pictures of him taken over the weekend at the golf course, and playing the We Love Donald Trump fealty game by tweeting them out and saying, doesn't he look strong and powerful and healthy and robust? He is going to kick ass in 2024. And meanwhile, they're circulating pictures of a befuddled old weeble wandering around the golf club looking for the brunch buffet with Lara Trump like guiding around by the elbow. And people were circulating these pictures. The Republicans are saying, look how robust and strong and alert he looks. Like, it's like a dog food commercial. He's got a bright, shiny coat. He may be 17 years old, but he's still as alert as he was when he was a puppy. And the pictures depict other people commenting on it. This just looks like, somebody telling their dad in line for brunch at the Blue Plate Special, stop yelling at the hostess, Dad. We're next. They're going to seat us soon. They're going to run out of bagels. They got to put my seat. I want to be at my seat. I'm an important person. Do you know who I am? Right. So, okay, whatever. Stripped of the social media platform like Twitter, the article continues, the former president has had to rely on issuing statements, some mimicking the tone and length of his past tweets, via his post-presidency office or political PAC press lists. So far, he's issued more than 24 endorsements and statements since leaving the White House. The more recent ones have bashed Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and sought credit for the current COVID-19 vaccine distribution. And while Trump, an avid cable news consumer, has avoided publicly responding to TV segments that are critical of him or the wave of recent cancel culture headlines, he's been tempted. Before a Wednesday appearance by his senior advisor Jason Miller on the War Room podcast hosted by former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, Trump told Miller he could make a little news by relaying the ex-president's thoughts on last Sunday's bombshell Oprah interview of Prince Harry and his wife, Meghan Markle. And, of course, that totally entered your consciousness, right? Because it was a huge success. When I was talking to the president this morning, he's like, yeah, she's no good. And I said that, and now everybody's seeing it. But you realize if you say anything negative about Meghan Markle, you get canceled. Look at Piers, Miller said, recounting his conversation with Trump, who had been referring to Piers Morgan, the polarizing Good Morning Britain host who parted ways with the show this week after dismissing Markle's revelations as lies. Some close aides have described Trump's hiatus from Twitter as a welcome break that allows his rare statements to carry more weight than the thought bubbles he would release on the internet, and they do not. But so far, many of his recent political maneuverings have been met with a shrug by the GOP. Trump's public tussle with the Republican Party over fundraising and the use of his name and likeness in appeals for money appeared to fizzle out after attorneys for the Republican National Committee denied Trump's cease and desist demands. They just said, no. If you were doing it. By week's end, the RNC was not only still using Trump's name in fundraising solicitations, it was offering him up as an enticement. Want to meet President Trump? A fundraising appeal read, touting the opportunity to dine with the former president. I said dine, although I did, wouldn't mind if the opportunity was for you to dine with the former president at an upcoming spring retreat and even take a photo with him too. So how about that for political impotence? He sends them a cease and desist letter. Not only do they say we're not ceasing or desisting, we're going to start selling you like a circus act. We reserve the right to sell off the chance to have dinner and a photo with you in your private life at your club. We own you. That's pretty amazing. So how do you like that? Anyway, I thought the article was interesting for what it was, but I also thought a rather amazing oversight, really, I guess, that journalists aren't recognizing the how and why of their normalization efforts and still doing it and still saying like, gosh, I'm surprised that he's not a political Godzilla in his post-presidency, given the fact that he wasn't even a political Godzilla in his presidency. Shouldn't really be that surprising. All right. Well, let's see. Lots of other things to get to, but no more time to do it. So we'll wrap things up for the day. I've got on tap another series of contributions from our friend Liberal Thinking, Rich, who's writing over at the All Daily Coast Progressives group. And he recently sent us a multi-part dispatch that we used a week or two ago on the some expansion ideas and thoughts on the American Rescue Plan. This time, he now turns his attention to the filibuster and filibuster reform efforts. That would dovetail nicely with the news that Jeff Merkley appears to be taking the lead among Senate Democrats on that subject. We got a lot to catch up on there, and we'll be monitoring the situation. But of course, I have a little bit of background in filibuster reform. So I guess I'll say this by way of preview. I'll probably be offering up Rich's commentaries, maybe in a slightly different format. Maybe we'll pause them along the way and comment along the way, although they are pretty short snippets. Give us it's a good way to cover the basics of the debate for those of you who might actually be new to the show and therefore not have heard the hours and hours and days worth of filibuster reform commentary I've offered before. But it nicely crystallizes the issue and then starts proposing some new ways forward, some ideas about how we might reform things, some of which I think have been discussed before and some of which are actually brand new. And, it'll be a good opportunity to give us the chance to talk things over as things develop. Tomorrow, Tuesday, I don't know, all of a sudden I had this thought, like, did Joan tell me that she wasn't going to be in this Tuesday? I don't think so. So I think we're in good shape and we can discuss that and other things with her. But obviously it's going to be a hot topic. And Eli Zupnik had contacted me last week. I got to get back to him via email and let him know that, yes, his suggestion that it might be time to have him back on and discuss developments in filibuster reform is well taken. So we'll move on to that perhaps at some point later this week as well. For now, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. What's he got on tap for us? North Carolina police evacuated local businesses in Brevard after they found several incendiary devices near a Black Baptist church and a county building. So trouble brewing there. After being routinely ignored by their departments, U.S. female firefighters are fighting discrimination with lawsuits, and state governors are evading sunshine laws during the pandemic to keep records from the public. Not a good development, but I guess we should have anticipated it. Justice has his eye on it next.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
There's always international news. How about this? London police face a backlash after beating the crap out of scores of women mourning the death of a young London woman murdered by an off-duty London cop. Yowza. And international arms sales flat from 2016 through 2020 for the first time, spiking in more than a decade.